Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining for the webinar on the theme Horizon of Genomic Profiling and Precision Medicine in Breast Cancer. This session is sponsored by OnQuest Laboratories. Without wasting any time, we will start with the first scientific talk. Our first speaker is Dr. Abhishek Kumar. He's the head of anatomic pathology at OnQuest Laboratories Limited, Gurugram. And his topic for the day is morphological overview of breast cancer and its shortcomings. Over to you, sir. Abhishek, sir. So can I also request you to unmute your mic, sir?
Hi everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Right. So I'll start with my presentation. It's the morphologic overview of breast cancer and its shortcomings. So there are multiple consensus guidelines which are available for us to fall back upon. There are guidelines available from NCCN, from ESMO, and our very own ICMR. This was last published in 2016, but I suppose it's still pretty relevant. So the factors guiding management of CA breast have largely been divided into intrinsic factors related to the patient and tumor characters, along with factors of socioeconomic importance. So those would largely be the patient age, the menopausal status, such factors, along with the tumor-related findings of tumor size and infiltration of the skin or chest wall, involvement of the nipple with Paget's disease or nipple discharge. The radiologic characters also play an important part if breast conserving therapy is being considered. The site and extent of nodal metastasis, distant metastasis, if any, then histologic features like grade, lymphatic invasion, resection margins, etc. The receptor status of the primary, recurrent, or metastatic tumor, the HER2 expression, proliferation markers, and then the socioeconomic factors also play an important role. Now, this is taken directly from the ICMR guidelines, in which they've given a pragmatic clinical system without going into the minute details of everything. So they categorize carcinoma breast into 4 categories. The first would be an operable breast cancer, in which the tumor is essentially less than 5 centimeters. The axillary lymph nodes are 1 to 3 or negative, and there's no metastatic disease. This would be the operable breast cancer. There's then the large operable breast cancer, essentially the stage T3, with a tumor size of more than 5 centimeters, N0 or 1, and no metastatic disease. This is followed by the locally advanced breast cancer, LABC, in which there is involvement of the skin or chest wall, or there is N2 or N3 category of axillary lymph nodes, but still no metastasis. And the final category, the highest, is the metastatic breast cancer with any N or T stage and distant metastasis present. Now, coming on to the conventional management of operative breast cancer, which would be less than 5 centimeters with 1 to 3 positive lymph nodes or negative nodes. So once the diagnosis of operable breast cancer is made, the second step would be histopathological confirmation and breast imaging. And depending on the patient's wishes to preserve breast or not, the patient is taken up for breast conserving therapy or MRM. And this is generally followed by adjuvant therapy in forms of radiotherapy and chemotherapy. There are circumstances when the patient might not be suitable, even with a operable breast cancer, for breast conserving therapy. One indication would be a tumor which is more than 4 centimeters in a small breast. In such cases, we generally attempt a trial of neoadjuvant chemotherapy and reassess if the tumor has shrunken and the patient has then become eligible for breast conserving therapy. Then the management of a large operable LABC would be the same findings. That first step would be histopathological confirmation, Additionally, the patient also is worked up for the possibility of metastasis. If metastasis is present, then the patient is then managed along those lines. If there's no metastatic disease, and depending on the patient's wishes to preserve the breast or not, MRM or breast conserving therapy is undertaken. If it is not feasible to do a mastectomy upfront, a trial of neoadjuvant chemotherapy is attempted. And following 4 cycles of chemotherapy, the response is assessed. If the patient is not responding, then mastectomy is done and a second line chemotherapy is taken. If the patient is responding, then all cycles of NACT are completed and the surgery is thereafter performed, followed by the remaining chemotherapy cycles. Coming to the histopathological assessment and reporting, I would like to stress the importance of the pre-analytical variables. Now, any pathology test is divided into 3 parts. There's the pre-analytical variable part, there's the analytical and the post-analytical. The pre-analytical would be basically the process of procuring the specimen, transportation, and those kinds of things before it ends up in the lab and the actual processing starts. The analytical part would be the one in which the analysis actually takes place, the grossing, the processing, and the reporting. And the post-analytical would be the transcription and all those things, the communication to the clinician part. So the clinician actually plays a very important role in actually generating a valid report, in that the pre-analytical variables are heavily dependent on how the specimen is procured and in regarding the fixation things. So there's the cold ischemia time, which is the amount of time the tissue is not put into formalin after it has been procured. The CAP guidelines generally say that it should be less than 1 hour. Then is the fixation time. The fixation time of the tissue should be between 6 to 48 hours. Less than 6 hours would be under fixation. More than 48 hours would be over fixation. And the type and volume of fixative is also very important. The only recommended fixative is 10% formalin. And the volume that is generally recommended is 10 times the volume of the specimen itself. This could be a challenge in large specimen, that if the specimen is to be transported to other labs. So best if you to maximize the amount of fixative that is being put in the container. Now it is the responsibility of the surgeon or the radiologist obtaining the specimen to document the collection of the time, and it is the responsibility of the pathologist to document the fixation start time. Coming on to the essentials of the histopathology report, any histopathology report would include the size of the tumor, the type of the tumor, the grade of the tumor, presence of extensive intraductal carcinoma, and the presence of lymphovascular emboli, the margin status in cases of wide excision, the number of metastatic nodes, the receptor status. In cases HER2 is 2+ by IHC, then FISH needs to be done to resolve this. Coming to the type of tumor, there are certain tumor types in which the usual algorithms are not applicable. The special tumor types are by definition not high grade, and they need to be more than 90% on an excision specimen, and they need to be HER2 negative. Now, important in this from a pathology perspective would be that the tumor needs to be more than 90% on an excision specimen. It's not enough to take a call on a core biopsy because of the tumor heterogeneity. Could be there could be mucin in one area, the tumor might be mucin poor in another area. So those special tumor types are the pure tubular carcinoma, the pure mucinous carcinoma, the pure cribriform carcinoma, and the encapsulated or the solid papillary carcinoma. These would generally tend to be ER/PR positive and low-grade tumors and have a better prognosis than the usual invasive breast carcinoma that we label as not specified. Then there are the salivary gland type carcinomas, for example, adenoid cystic carcinoma and the secretory carcinoma. and low-grade forms of metaplastic carcinoma. The last three, you would expect them to be triple negative. The secretory carcinoma is amenable to therapy with pan-TRK inhibitors. Much like in the lung scenario, if you have some driving mutation, then that can be targeted. Then coming on to the tumor grade, so all carcinomas are graded, including the ones that are post-NACT, the special types that I just mentioned, and the tumors that we see on core biopsies. The Nottingham's modification of Bloom-Richardson scoring system is used. So the three factors that are taken into consideration are tubule formation, which is basically related to architecture, the nuclear grade, and the number of mitosis per 10 high power field. Significant in this would be the size of the field that a pathologist looks into, because the per 10 high power field can vary if the size of the field is large or small. Then coming on to the biomarker testing. So ER is called positive if it's greater than 1%, less than 1% is negative. But recently there has been a shift in that tumors with 1 to 10% positivity are now called ER low positive, and it's based on the finding that some studies have indicated that they have more similarity with ER negative tumors, and the prognosis and responsiveness to therapy is variable in these cases. But PR is still the same. Greater than 1% is positive, less than 1% is negative. What's relevant in this is that the clinician needs to be aware that the ER-PR results need to be correlated with the histology. And this is a table highlighting some unusual results that should make you wary that the result in your hand is sort of suspicious. So highly unusual ER negative results would be a low grade invasive carcinoma of no special type, a lobular carcinoma, pure tubular cribriform or mucinous carcinomas, and encapsulated papillary and solid papillary carcinomas. If you have a histologic diagnosis of these tumor types and the ER report is negative, then you might want to consider retesting. Highly unusual ER positive results would be in cases of metaplastic carcinomas of all subtypes, adenoid cystic carcinomas and other salivary gland carcinomas of the breast, secretory carcinoma, and carcinomas with apocrine differentiation. Again, I would like to reiterate that pre-analytical variables are critical. It's our experience that when reporting on outside referral materials, if fixation procedure is not documented and poor quality of fixation is seen, we generally put it in our reports. And although the ASCO-CAP guidelines suggest that such samples should be rejected, it is not feasible in our at least setting. Coming to the HER2 testing, HER2 IHC testing should ideally be done by the FDA approved HERCEP test or the Ventana HER2 new assay. However, they are not commonly used due to the cost involved. So before using any non-validated antibody in routine practice, the lab has the responsibility to validate it with either FISH or against the FDA approved IHC assays. So this is one table documenting the criteria that we use in grading this. The negative is basically less than 10% of the cells or no staining with weak staining. The 2+ or the equivocal is weak or moderate membranous staining in greater than 10% of the cells, or complete membranous staining, which is intense, but in less than 10% of the tumor cells. And score 3+ or positive is given in complete membranous staining that is intense and more than 10% of the tumor cells. Continuing with the HER2 testing. HER2 testing should be done on all new primary and newly metastatic carcinomas. And you should consider a re-review if HER2 is positive in grade 1 tumors. Again, in the special types of carcinomas of pure mucinous, pure cribriform, or pure tubular carcinomas. Also consider retesting after the initial sample was HER2 negative if the pre-analytical variables are unknown, or if additional sample contains higher grade or a distinct tumor, and maybe to rule out the heterogeneity in high-grade carcinomas. Coming to biomarker tests, coming to Ki67, it's a marker of proliferative activity and correlates with tumor grade and can thus provide useful additional prognostic information in low-grade tumors. Validated Ki67 testing in node-negative, small, low-grade tumors can help decide the need for chemotherapy in such cases. However, routine testing is not recommended as there is no consensus on the scoring. The definition of low versus high expression, appropriate cutoff points for positivity are not available. There's confusion about which part of the tumor should be reported, the leading edge, hot spots, the entire tumor, and there's lack of data on the effect of pre-analytical variables. The effect of pre-analytical factors is pretty well defined in ER/PR and HER2, but there are no such guidelines existing as of now regarding Ki67. Then it's generally recommended that IHC findings can be used as a surrogate for intrinsic tumor groups. So tumors which are ER positive with a low Ki67 index, less than 14%, and are HER2 negative would be the luminal A types. ER positive HER2 variable but with a high Ki67 would be the luminal B types. HER2 subtype is defined by negativity for ER/PR and positivity for HER2, and triple negative obviously is ER/PR and HER2 negative. Now, the curative intent of breast carcinoma is based on surgical removal of the primary tumor and is commonly followed by radiotherapy, and for tumors considered to be at high risk of relapse by adjuvant chemotherapy. There's a need to develop most appropriate means of defining which patients are at a sufficiently high risk of relapse to justify the use of chemotherapy, which is a burden to the patient and to the society in general in terms of cost involved. Now, traditionally, phenotypical tumors and patient characters are used to infer disease behavior. However, recently, insights from genetic alterations provide additional information in the form of gene expression signatures. Now, there are a number of these tests available, and this is one table which highlights some of these tests available. The prominent ones would be the MammaPrint, the Oncotype DX, which is the oldest one, the Prosigna, EndoPredict, and then there are two tests, breast cancer index and genomic grade. So now if you just go down the table, you see that a lot of these tests are actually approved by the FDA and by the EMA, and are recommended in most of the guidelines for management of breast cancer. So the challenges that might come up while using gene expression signatures would be the cost versus the benefit analysis. For example, MammaPrint would cost something around 1.65 to 2 lakhs, and the TAT is another consideration. The turnaround time for MammaPrint would be around 20 days. It's not tested to the best of my knowledge in India. The sample goes either to the European or the US labs. Then there's the choice of the most appropriate test that needs to be done. You can choose MammaPrint or Oncotype DX or Prosigna. And there's the feasibility of extrapolating the robust scientific evidence generated through large randomized trials in the Western population on Indian patients with known differences in age and stage of presentation. So I hope these points will be covered in the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. If we have any questions for Dr. Abhishek, we request our audience please put them in the chat box. With that, we'll move on to the next session. Our next speaker is Dr. Atul Samaya. He's a senior consultant, surgical oncology and head oncology services at Bansal Hospital, Bhopal. And he'll be talking on the topic precision medicine's journey from diagnostic to prognostic and therapeutic decisions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening to all. So Dr. Abhishek has already set the stage for the genomic testing and the precision medicine. So I will be talking about the journey of precision medicine and its role in the management of early breast cancer. So can you share my slides, please?
Sure, sir. I'll just share your slides.
So we all know precision medicine is also called the personalized medicine or individualized medicine. I remember in 2009 in MD Anderson, they have a separate building for personalized medicine. So that was the future of medicine, and that is why they have a separate building for same. And we all know cancer care was one of the first medical specialties which applies the precision medicine to its best. The purpose of precision medicine is to individualize the treatment of the patient and its management. The precision medicine is not only based for the treatment of the patient, but also involved at the diagnosis to planning and the further systemic therapy, whether it is radiation therapy or the surgery or the chemotherapy, and also for follow-up care and survivorship. This journey of precision medicine is started around 3 decades back, but the last 1 decade, it is established in clinical practice. In 2011, the National Research Council released a consensus study report, and the title of that was Towards Precision Medicine. So precision medicine is not only the molecular genetics or basic science, it encompasses the clinical spectrum of disease as well as basic science discipline. So the new era of precision medicine is because of the molecular genetics, clinical data, and development of high-speed sequencing, and there are means to analyze these large data and apply in the management of the patient. The journey, as I said, is started around 2-3 decades back, and the important landmark was the study of Perot et al. And they studied around 8,000 genes in 65 breast cancer patients. And they used the DNA microarray technique for quantitative analysis. And this was a seminal work, and that is the work done by others also. And then they created or defined the 4 molecular subtypes of the breast cancer, which is already discussed by Dr. Abhishek. So if you see, all we know these 4 subtypes based on the molecular classification, luminal AB, TNBC, and HER2 positive. But if you see, the luminal A have different outcomes in a certain percentage of the patient. Similarly, luminal V, there is a variable course, and some TNBC, they have a better prognosis compared to the other TNBC patients. So there is a heterogeneity even in this molecular subtype. So there was a need for further subclassification based on the genomic profiling or some other test. Next, please. So there are multiple gene assays which are available in clinical use, which is already discussed by Dr. Abhishek in brief. There are 4 or 5 or 6 multi-gene assays which are available for the clinical use, and we are making decision based on these genomic assays of the patient's tumor biopsy. Next. The oldest one, as is told by Dr. Abhishek, is Oncotype DX recurrence score, which uses 21 pre-selected genes, and the study of the trials conducted on this oncotype DX recurrence score, all patients were ER positive, node negative, and treated with tamoxifen. Another gene assay which has been recommended with the NCCN also is the PAM50 of Prosigna. Again, the patients were ER positive and HER2 negative, and the postmenopausal patients. So there are limitations. These assays were analyzed in a limited group or the selected subgroup of the patients, and they have a robust data. Definitely, they have a robust data for oncotype DX and also for Prosigna. But the selected population was a subgroup of patients, and that is why they have some limitation in utility. Next. Then come to this MemmaPrint, which is a mRNA expression of 17 gene assay, and that was also tested in tumor tissue. The important part of this MemmaPrint assay that they included the growth of signaling, apoptosis, metastasis, replication, and angiogenesis. So that is why this assay was providing a good or poor prognostic signature, and they included HR positive and node positive cancer. So this is the only assay which include node positive cancer in the prognostication of the patients. The first time this MemmaPrint assay was published in 2002 in Nature, and Gene Expression Profiling Predicts Clinical Outcome of Breast Cancer was the title. Next. So with this functional genomic profiling of breast cancer, MemmaPrint was the one part and the blueprint was the other part. MemmaPrint used to assess potential for distant metastasis, whether they have a low risk for metastasis or they have a high risk for metastasis. And the blueprint, based on the 18 gene analysis, they used to divide the tumor on the luminal type, HER2 type, or the vessel type. So this blueprint was based on the signaling pathway. And again, this genomic profiling can be done on the core biopsy or on the surgical specimen. So based on the combination of this MemmaPrint of 17 gene assay and the blueprint of 18 gene assay, they divided the combination of these two. The low risk and the high risk based on the MemmaPrint can be further divided based on the blueprint, whether they are the low risk luminal type A, or they are the ultra low risk luminal type A, or the high risk luminal type B. Similarly, they are the low risk HER2/neu positive or the high risk HER2/neu positive. And similarly, there are ER positive tumors which have been classically defined in the luminal A or V. They have a basal-like characteristic, and this can be defined by this functional genomic profiling of breast cancer by combination of MemmaPrint and blueprint. So how this was developed? In Netherlands Cancer Institute, they collected the samples of breast cancer patients and followed up for 20. These patients were followed up for 20 years. If someone have not developed metastasis for next 5 years, they have been defined low risk. If somebody has developed the metastasis and within 5 years, they have been defined as high risk. Then they analyzed the whole genome, sequencing was done, and based on this full human genome of 25,000 genes, they identified there are important 70 genes which can define the patients, whether the patient is a low risk patient or is a high risk patient. And the important point of this MemmaPrint assay is that ERPR, HER2/neu, and Ki67 are not among the top 70 genes they have analyzed. Unlike the oncotype DX, where they have analyzed the 21 genes, signature genes include ERPR and HER2/neu is the part of the analysis. So how they define the 70 genes? We all know the metastasis has different steps, and the early metastasis pathway, it involves the 7 steps. Growth and proliferation of tumor is the first step, and there are certain genes responsible for that. Then the angiogenesis, local invasion, then come the intravasation of the tumor cells, the survival of cells inside the circulation, then the extravasation outside the cells, and there is a microenvironment where the tumor deposited its secondary sites and survive. So there are different genes at different level which are involved for the metastasis. So if you can assess these different genes, and the MemmaPrint is the conglomeration of these different 70 genes of different stages of metastasis pathway, and that is how the MemmaPrint was developed. So this was the story of the MemmaPrint development, and then any test or any clinical implication of any test requires the trials, or there should be the randomized control trial, and it should be tested in the RCT before implicating the result of any test or any medicine. So this was the MINDEC trial which was designed, and to answer the question, can genomic profiling of breast cancer with high risk clinical and pathological features? Basically, patients have a high tumor, larger tumor size, higher grade, or 1 to 3 lymph node positivity. These are the high clinical features or pathological features, can avoid the chemotherapy. Before that, it used to be the patient who are node positive needs chemotherapy, or only the patients who are node negative can be defined into the low risk category. And that is the genomic profiling tool is 17 gene MemmaPrint assay. So MemmaPrint has a predictive utility. If you see this 5-year survival difference, then a low patient who have been defined as high risk on MemmaPrint, the persons who have received only endocrine therapy, or the person who have received who have received endocrine therapy alone, and person who have received chemotherapy along with endocrine therapy. So there is almost 12% difference in survival for the patients who are high risk on MemmaPrint. Apart from this, the I-SPY to previous one, please. Yeah. Apart from this, the I-SPY 2 trial which shows the higher the score of MemmaPrint, there are more chemosensitivity. Next. So this trial is enrolled around 7,000 patients. The initial results were published in 2016 when they have more than 60% follow-up at 5 years. And then the results were published in 2020 recently with a median follow-up of more than 8 years. And recently, this randomized trial exploratory analysis by age is published in Lancet Oncology in 2021. So if you compare the TELREX trial and MINDEC trial, the MINDEC trial, they have a clinically high risk patient, and TELREX trial, they have a different group. The score of 11 to 25, which they have defined as the intermediate group. Initially, it was the up to 10 was the low risk, and 11 to 25, all we know is the intermediate, and the more than 25 was considered high risk, more than 30 was considered high risk patients. So when this MINDEC trial, if to the patient population, the age was more or less same, number of patients were more definitely in the TELREX trial. But if you use the high risk features like the more than 2 centimeter T2 and above was 58% compared to 24% in this higher grade tumor in the MINDEC trial, and the lymph node positive were 48% compared to none of the patients were lymph node positive in TELREX trial. Similarly, they have a luminal type 100% in TELREX trial and 91% in MINDEC, and 7% were the other luminal type or HER2 positive or TNBC. So they are 100% high risk patient compared to only 26% high risk patient in TELREX trial. So primary endpoint was the distant metastasis free DMFS, distant metastasis free survival. At the 2006, then they found the person who are the patient who is clinically high risk was genomically low risk defined by MemmaPrint, do not benefit from chemotherapy, and they can avoid chemotherapy safely. If you see the high risk group, because 48% were lymph node positive. So in this group also, if you see at 2016 at 5-year survival, that there was hardly difference of 0.7% in high risk patient if the MemmaPrint score is low. And similarly, at 8 years, with the low MammaPrint score, the survival between the endocrine therapy alone and the endocrine plus chemotherapy was only 1.3%. So safely, even the clinically high-risk patient can avoid the potentially toxic chemotherapy if the MammaPrint score is low. Next. And then intention to treat population, again, there was a difference of survival seen at 8 years was 2.6% and around 1.3% at 5 years. Next, please. And that was around 1% at 5 years. Next, please. Then in again the age group, as in the TRILREX trial, they have shown the person who is less than 50 years may benefit from chemotherapy compared to patients who are more than 50 years. Similarly, in this, with the patients who were less than 50 years of age, there is a difference in survival after at the age of after the follow-up of 10 years, up to the 10 years. If you see this graph starts separating, the graph starts separating after the 4 years. So 4 years after, if the patient who is less than 50 years do not receive chemotherapy, they have a decreased survival compared to the person who have received chemotherapy. But this curve do not separate even at the 8 to 9 years of follow-up if the person is more than 50 years of age. So the absolute difference is 0.2% in the patients who are more than 50 years of age if they are clinically high and genomically low risk patients. But there is almost 5% difference at 8 years if the patient is less than 50 years of age. So why there is a difference in the patient who is less than 50 years of age? So probably we all know the chemotherapy apparently having early effect. But what has seen in this previous chart, the chemotherapy benefit is seen after 4 years. So that is a late effect. But chemotherapy, we all know, benefit mainly seen in first 5 years of chemotherapy. So probably this is the chemotherapy has an indirect effect on the ovarian suppression. And similarly, in the SOFT trial, which have been shown that if you have a ovarian suppression and the premenopausal patient, or then they have a better survival in the ER positive group. So probably the chemotherapy effect here is due to the ovarian suppression rather than itself the effect of chemotherapy. That has been seen, as I told, in SOFT and TEXT trials. So the possible age-dependent effect is due to chemotherapy-induced ovarian suppression. So the MINDEC trial was discussed in 2020 ESCO also. Is menopausal status a factor, as half of these patients are is less than 50 years. Next, please. So how to make a decision for the patients if you have a clinical data is available, genomic profiling is available in the form of MammaPrint. If MammaPrint is low, postmenopausal women, there is no benefit of chemotherapy. But if MammaPrint is high, definitely there is benefit of chemotherapy. But if patient is premenopausal, high score definitely benefit from chemotherapy. But MammaPrint low score, we have to discuss with the patient. This can benefit either to have a chemotherapy or some form of ovarian suppression, either oophorectomy or hormonal suppression. So this chemotherapy benefit in the initial slide, you have seen 12% and the distance metastasis-free survival. And similarly, the increasing chemosensitivity with the high score of MammaPrint. Another important point of the MammaPrint scoring was that they have defined the score low, and apart from this, there is a subgroup which has been defined as ultra low. What is ultra low? If somebody has a score of more than 0.355 plus up to 1, they have been defined as ultra low risk. So whether these ultra low risk patients actually benefit from the endocrine therapy. So There is low risk patient. We all know low risk patient do not benefit from chemotherapy. So there is another subgroup, ultra low risk patient. They actually benefit from the long term endocrine therapy or not. Next. So there is a Stockholm tamoxifen study which have shown they have followed up the patient up to 20 years, and they have calculated the survival at 20 years for the patients in the ultra low group with tamoxifen and without endocrine therapy. And they found there is a marginal difference at 10 years in that survival, 97 versus 94% in the patients who are ultra low in the cohort. Next, please. So this can be defined in this graph. These are the patients ultra low risk received the endocrine therapy. These are the patients who have not received endocrine therapy on ultra low risk. And this is the patient who are low risk patient. They have treated with endocrine therapy, and this is the low risk patient not treated with endocrine therapy. So we can see a significant difference in the low risk patient receiving endocrine therapy, and there is definitely survival benefit. And the endocrine therapy, the 20-year survival is around 90%, and without endocrine therapy is 78%. There is a 12% difference here in low risk group. But if you see the ultra low risk group, the difference is hardly 3% at 20 years. So next question is whether we can avoid the endocrine therapy or limit the endocrine therapy duration in these ultra low risk population. Next, please. So excellent breast cancer survival was seen in the patient who are low and ultra low risk patient. If patient have a ultra low risk patient, 80 years, only 8 events. Low risk patient, there are 69 events, and high risk patient, they have a 160 events. So there is a difference in survival. But if you see ultra low and low risk, they have a minor difference in the survival at 8 years. Next, please. Clinically high risk and clinically low risk. If somebody has a clinical low risk, they have a 6 events, and the clinically high risk have a 2 events, and they were MemmaPrint wise low score. So there is almost no difference in survival whether patient is clinically high risk or low risk if someone is MemmaPrint low score. Next. Then another point, whether the extended endocrine therapy is beneficial in the patient who are low risk. So we have already seen the endocrine therapy may have limitation in ultra low risk group. Endocrine therapy is very useful in the low risk group without the addition of chemotherapy. So another subgroup, whether the extended letrozole therapy is useful, and this trial has been designed NSBP P42 for this to answer this. And they are all postmenopausal patients, CR and PR positive cancer, stage 1, 2, 3A. Disease-free survival, 5 years of endocrine therapy, whether it is aromatase inhibitor or tamoxifen plus aromatase inhibitor, completed 5 years in combination. So whether notes positive or negative, prior adjuvant therapy, yes, whether tamoxifen or AI, they have been defined to continue letrozole for another 5 years or flash over to another 5 years after the completion of endocrine therapy for 5 years. Next. So if you see the distant relapses and their group, they are this is the patient population, this is high risk group, this is the low risk, ultra low risk, and low risk. So they have a combined the low risk group. They have been segregated into ultra low and low risk group. So distant relapse 1.8% and the low risk group. If you see disease-free survival, there is a different ultra low risk group not benefiting much from the extended endocrine therapy, but the benefit is clearly seen in the low risk group patient who are not ultra low, but there is no benefit in the high risk group patient. So overall, if patient who are the low risk but not ultra low risk group, they benefit from the endocrine therapy, extended endocrine therapy. The high risk patient actually do not benefit from the extended endocrine therapy. This relative benefit was seen as 36%, and here is the breast cancer free interval is 52%. Next, please. So the somebody who have a MemmaPrint low score, what are the implications of clinical decision for chemotherapy and endocrine therapy? Excuse me. A MemmaPrint ultra low score, excellent prognosis even with less than 5 years of endocrine therapy. So no significant benefit from endocrine therapy or minimal endocrine therapy. So basically this group of the patient we can limit endocrine therapy for lesser duration or sorry excuse me. So this is the subgroup of patient where we have to define whether we need to continue endocrine therapy for 5 years or not. Similarly, patients who are MemmaPrint low but not ultra low, they significantly benefit from endocrine therapy, and there is 50% relative reduction in breast cancer specific survival. So there is a need for endocrine therapy in this group, but no chemotherapy. What's about extended, previous one please. What's about extended endocrine therapy? MemmaPrint ultra low risk, definitely no extended endocrine therapy. But patient who have a low risk but not ultra low risk, significant benefit from the extended endocrine therapy. So with this ultra low risk group, we have a endocrine therapy for limited period, but low score but not ultra low score, they should continue to have a benefit from the extended endocrine therapy. This all we have discussed about the MemmaPrint genes. Now in combination of blueprint genes which have a signaling pathway driving cancer growth, so combination of MemmaPrint and blueprint, how we can define the tumor further, or we can classify patient based combination of these functional genomic profiling. If we combine these MemmaPrint and the blueprint, we have another group of patients. There will be low risk luminal type A, ultra low risk luminal type A. There will be high risk luminal type B. In the HER2 type, there will be low risk HER2 type, or there will be high risk HER2 type. Similarly, there will be because this is a ER positive group, so the person who are ER positive, but they may behave like basal type. So they have been defined. The basal type can be defined is the true basal type. The basal type is TNBC, and the high risk basal type like the ER positive. So their behavior is like the basal TNBC cancer, despite they are the ER positive. With functional molecular subtyping, we have already discussed based on the ER, PR, HER2/neu, and this is based on the ISC. They have been defined TNBC, luminal type, and HER2 type. So there was a NVRST trial, and with more than 1,000 patients, and they have collected the core biopsy before the neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and they did the ISC and FIS and compared with the genomic profiling, that is the MemmaPrint and blueprint. So how there is a difference in the classification if we do on the ISC and FIS, and this we define the molecular subtype based on the ISC and FIS, and define these molecular subtype based on the MemmaPrint and blueprint. There was around 22% discordance classification based on these two types of subclassification. Next, please. So, based on the ISC and FIS, the tumor are luminal A, luminal B, HER type, or the TNBC. But if you define with the blueprint, a small percentage of the patient can be the luminal type can go to basal type. This percentage of the patient who are HER2/neu positive will be behaving like basal type, that will be defined on the MemmaPrint. And similarly, the small percentage of the HER2 type patients, which are they can be classified into luminal V type. So there is a discordance between the classification based on the ISC and also the MemmaPrint and blueprint classification. Next, please. there is a complete pathology, based on the complete response, pathological complete response, and they have been further defined the luminal A, luminal B, ER positive, and the vessel type. Next, please. So if you define the tumor based on the ER positivity and the PR positivity, the all ER positive cancer, ER 1 to 100%, and the PR positive cancers. Next, please. This is the ER positive by ISC. This is the percentage of the PR positive by ISC. And then this is defined by the genomic, the PCR based on the complete response, based on the pathological complete response. And the complete response, if you will see, there are significant patients are the basal type and compared to luminal type. So almost 32% patients who are either ER positive are actually basal type, because if you see the luminal type cancer, hardly they have a complete response with the chemotherapy compared to the basal type who have a significant pathological complete response with the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So based on this neoadjuvant chemotherapy, the TNBC have a complete response of 37% patients. Similarly, the ER positive patients who have been classified as basal type based on the blueprint have a 34% complete pathological complete response. So they are actually ER positive cancer behaving like the TNBC or basal type. So if you define by the pathological complete response, there are patients who are the ER positive luminal type, then the ER positive B type, then the ER basal type, and finally ER positive basal non-pathological complete response. But if you define with the blueprint, there are clear cut definition or the demarcation. The ER positive luminal type, they are the ER positive luminal B type, and the ER positive basal type. So this blueprint along with MemmaPrint can subclassify the ER positive tumor and HER2 positive tumor, whether they are the basal type, and they should be treated differently from the patients routinely we are treating the ER positive cancers. So what I said, there is a clinical implication of ER positive basal breast cancer. Should we treat them with the neoadjuvant chemotherapy like what we are treating the TNBC? So these are the luminal cancer by classification on ISC. But why the MemmaPrint, they are the basal type. And should we start neoadjuvant chemotherapy because the pathological complete response rate is similar to the TNBC in these luminal cancer of basal type. Next, please. And second, the person who have not responded to neoadjuvant chemotherapy can capecitabine, the patient can be benefited from the capecitabine in this subgroup of patient. So the comprehensive genomic profiling of breast cancer, clinically low, MemmaPrint low, they are the luminal A type. Clinically low, MemmaPrint high, they can be the basal type, ER positive basal type, or the luminal B type. Similarly, T2 and the clinically high risk patient, they have clinically high but MemmaPrint low. They can be less than 50 years, more than 50 years, less than 50 years. Endocrine therapy plus ovarian suppression, more than 50 years, endocrine therapy alone. Clinically high as well as MemmaPrint high, they can be basal type or luminal B type. Basal type, should we give neoadjuvant chemotherapy to these patients and treat with like similar to TNBC and then add the endocrine therapy, or if they are the luminal B type, standard chemotherapy and endocrine therapy after the surgery adjuvant setting. Next, please. And then again, the person who are clinically low risk and MemmaPrint low risk, ultra low risk, what next? Endocrine therapy, extended endocrine therapy, or limited endocrine therapy. But if they are the basal type, MemmaPrint high, definitely there should be consideration to treat them like the TNBC. Next, please. So if we talk of comprehensive genomic profiling in early breast cancer, MammaPrint with Blueprint is the most comprehensive genomic profiling available for early breast cancer. It gives information about important decision-making points like the ultra-low risk, like the high-risk patients, like the basal type, the ER-positive basal type. So it's not only giving chemotherapy or no chemotherapy in these patients, because other prognostic tests, a multi-gene array, they generally decide on the prognosis whether these patients benefit from chemotherapy or do not benefit from chemotherapy. But here we have 2 or 3 additional points we are getting. One is ultra low. 2, can we stop the endocrine therapy after a limited period, maybe less than 5 years? Again, there are vessel type where we have to plan chemotherapy or the neoadjuvant chemotherapy like the TNBC. So probably in the coming years, we have to think whether to start genomic profiling before the surgery and the all ER positive or the luminal type cancer. So first to do the genomic profiling, define whether they are ultra low risk, they are high risk, or they are the ER positive basal type, and then plan the treatment. Next, please. So genomic profiling informs about the chemotherapy, no chemotherapy, if chemotherapy, which regime, TNBC regime, or the docetaxel or paclitaxel-based chemo regime, or maybe the simple FEC. Neoadjuvant or adjuvant therapy. If neoadjuvant therapy, patient do not receive the PCR, what next? And what should be the duration of endocrine therapy? So these answers are available with these, combining the genomic profiling with MammaPrint and Blueprint, which are not available with the other microarray tests. Next, please. So this precision medicine in breast cancer of genomic profiling has a broad spectrum of clinical and basic science data, but to individualize treatment, we need to have a Blueprint and MammaPrint combination, which is more accurate in predicting the risk of relapse and de-escalation of therapy. Next, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atul. We'll now move on to our last speaker session. Our next speaker is Dr. Mithun Chako. He is at Jubilee Mission Medical College and Research Institute at Thrissur, Kerala. And he'll be talking on an interesting case scenario, breast cancer with precision medicine. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thanks the organizers for giving this opportunity. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
The screen is being shared, right?
Yes, sir, your screen is visible, sir.
Yeah. And special thanks to Dr. Abhishek and Dr. Atul for the excellent presentation. So it has made my work actually half. So we have heard a lot of discussion about the individualized medicine, the personalized medicine, the comprehensive genomic profiling of combination of MammaPrint and Blueprint. So I'll be discussing certain interesting cases. These cases are usual cases that we see in our OP. So how this genomic profiling, the combination of MammaPrint and Blueprint, can change the way we treat these breast cancers. These are all normally seen in our OPD. So let us, we have, almost all the discussion has been made by Dr. Atul. I will be just concentrating on certain points and certain common cases that we see in our OP. So this is a case one. I'll, without much ado, I'm directly going into the case because we are already running short of time. So the case one is a perimenopausal 50-year-old female. It's a biopsy-proven invasive ductal carcinoma. T2, 3.5 centimeter, one node positive. That's biopsy positive axillary lymph node. So it's an N1A. ER positive 80%, PR positive, HER2 1+, that means it's negative, grade 2, and a Ki67 of 18%. So in our day-to-day practice, it's a clinically high risk. We'll have certain doubt that we should give, whether we should give any adjuvant chemotherapy or go ahead with surgery, since it's axillary lymph node positive and followed with chemotherapy and hormonal therapy. Should we add, This will be the questions that comes to our mind. The second case, similar, almost similar, same age, 50-year-old perimenopausal woman, but with a smaller T size and N0. It's actually T1C, 1.8 centimeters, but with the same all other characteristics, ER positive, PR positive, 80% and 50%, HER2 negative, grade 2, with a Ki67 of 18%. So in our clinical experience, it's a clinically low risk. The case 1 is a clinically high risk. So usually what happens, you go ahead with a surgery followed with most probably with only endocrine therapy, since it is a clinically low risk group. So what is the benefit of doing a comprehensive genomic profiling in the form of MammaPrint plus Blueprint in such a scenario? So this is the first report of the case 1. The case 1 report, the MammaPrint came out to be low risk, but the Blueprint luminal A. So it's a low risk MammaPrint, and by genomic profiling, it came out to be the molecular subgroup of luminal A. So though it's clinically comes to MammaPrint low risk, we can go ahead with surgery and followed with safely avoid chemotherapy in such a scenario, which is MammaPrint low, because large number of patients in the MINDAC trial, it is exact case, one of the exact cases in the MINDAC trial, in which single node positive T2 lesion, we can safely avoid. We have seen the data from Dr. Atul that we can safely avoid chemotherapy in such a MammaPrint low risk and a Blueprint luminal A subtype. Now comes the second. So there's a twist in this. So though it's a clinically low risk, but the MammaPrint came out to be high risk and the Blueprint came out to be basal. So when we see the NBreast, the neoadjuvant breast data, using the MammaPrint and Blueprint, there was a discordance of 22% considering the pathologic factors and the genomic profiling, the high risk, the basal subtype. And the discordance was basically seen in the ER-PR positive. So there is a specific subgroup, as Dr. Atul in the previous presentation has already told, regarding the ER positive basal subtype. So this is a classic case of an ER positive basal subtype, which without the comprehensive genomic profiling, we would exactly put in as a luminal A subtype and go ahead with surgery and give only adjuvant hormonal therapy. But these are the patients, even with clinically low risk, they are bound to metastasize, they're bound to fail distant in our clinical practice. So this is the exact case in which we can even go ahead with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. If you see the NBreast trial in which neoadjuvant chemotherapy was given for the ER positive basal subtype, there was complete pathologic response to the tune of the 34%, to the tune of 34% in the basal ER positive breast cancer. So what is the importance of giving neoadjuvant in such a scenario? The importance is that we can prognosticate. So even if the patient is not achieving complete pathological response, we can even think of exploiting the data of the CREATEX, of giving adjuvant capecitabine for another 6 months in such a scenario. So this is the importance of doing the comprehensive genomic profiling in a clinically low risk premenopausal. Now coming to the next case. This is also usually seen in our OP. It's a large hormone receptor positive tumor. So it's a 55-year-old female, 4.5 centimeter invasive ductal tumor, ER positive 80% via IHC, PR positive 30%, HER2 negative by IHC and FISH, clinically not negative, grade 2. So this can be considered as a clinically high risk because of the size of the tumor, large hormone receptor positive, and the genomic profiling was done, which showed a Blueprint of luminal A type and MammaPrint low risk type. So this is also similar to the case 1 in which we can avoid chemotherapy and we can safely go ahead with adjuvant hormonal therapy and even think of giving neoadjuvant hormonal therapy. So that is the importance of using, even in advanced cases, even in clinically high-risk patient, if we are doing for a genomic profiling, we can think of giving neoadjuvant hormonal therapy. So in the NBREST data shows that in luminal A subtype, the chance of complete pathologic response is less than 5%. If you see, I think it's around 2 to 3% in luminal A and 4 to 5% in luminal B, if you're giving neoadjuvant hormonal therapy. So the NCCN guidelines have shown that we can even think of giving preoperative endocrine therapy in ER positive patients based on low risk luminal biology. So if we are going for genomic profiling, we can even think of neoadjuvant hormonal therapy in clinically low risk, clinically high risk hormone positive patient. So this is the preoperative endocrine therapy alone may be considered for patients with ER positive disease based on comorbidities or low risk luminal biology based on the clinical and or genomic signatures. So that is the importance of the comprehensive genomic profiling. So this is another case, say small hormone receptor positive tumor, 69-year-old patient, 1.8 centimeter tumor, ER positive 90%, PR 30%, HER2 negative, clinically not negative, grade 2. The additional background is that the patient wants to go outside to see their daughter who is settled in US. So patient going on a 2-month vacation and would like to postpone her treatment if possible. So that is the main thing, if possible. If you think that the patient won't metastasize, if you think that we can give some form of neoadjuvant treatment, neoadjuvant hormonal treatment in such a clinically low risk case, and we can avoid surgery, we can delay surgery by 2 months. Is it possible? There comes the importance of comprehensive genomic profiling in the form of MammaPrint and Blueprint. And it was conducted, it showed that it was Blueprint basal. So only 1.8 centimeter, ER positive, PR positive, HER2 negative, and MammaPrint high risk. So we cannot think of avoiding or delaying treatment by 2 months because it has been shown that from the diagnosis, we should start systemic treatment as soon as possible in basal subtype. Because basal subtype, we all know it's a systemic disease and the patient is going to metastasize if we delay the treatment. The NBREST data shows that there's a 35% likelihood of pathology, complete pathologic response with neoadjuvant chemotherapy when basal subtype is diagnosed. So in such a patient, definitely go. So whenever we are planning for some neoadjuvant treatment, we can think of the comprehensive genomic profiling. So preoperative systemic therapy may be considered if the patient's cancer subtype is associated with a high likelihood of response. So that is where it comes. The NBREST data shows that ER positive basal subtype, which is a specific entity, has got a very good chance of complete pathologic response. And even in early breast cancer, we're doing genomic profiling, we can think of giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy in such scenario. So this is the NCCN guideline showing if considering for preoperative therapy, consider the use of gene expression assay during workup because it helps us in deciding the type of treatment, the type of neoadjuvant treatment that has to be given in a breast cancer patient who is ER/PR positive, who may be clinically low risk or clinically high risk. So preoperative systemic therapy may also be administered in patients with operable tumors, even in early breast cancer, if the patient's breast cancer subtype is one associated with high likelihood of response, especially the earlier previous scenario in which it's an ER positive basal subtype breast cancer. So this is the concordance that has to be shown, the success rate of testing core biopsy or surgical resection specimen. So if we are doing core biopsy, the success rate is around 93.7%, and in surgical resection, the success rate is around 95%. And the blueprint concordance between the surgical specimen and the biopsy specimen is around 100%, and MammaPrint is 95%. So when we are going for neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we can do upfront with the biopsy itself, the blueprint and MammaPrint. And there comes the importance of blueprint actually. So it's basically for deciding the neoadjuvant treatment, the blueprint comes to our hand in the actual terms. Now coming to the fifth case study, this is also a routine case that can be seen. The 55-year-old female, 1.5 centimeter, T1 not negative, ER positive, PR positive, HER2 negative. It's a grade 1 tumor. The additional background is that patient is having a lot of comorbidities. Patient cannot take adjuvant. Patient is not willing to continue adjuvant hormonal treatment for long, and she wishes to discontinue based on the side effects. So her blueprint and MammaPrint testing was done, and it turned out to be luminal A by blueprint, and MammaPrint showed ultra low risk. So we had a lot of discussion in the previous study regarding ultra low risk. So the ultra low risk data, Stockholm data shows that the breast cancer specific survival is 97% when the patient is offered as little as 2 years of endocrine therapy, and the breast cancer specific survival is 94% when the patient is not offered endocrine therapy. So this is the subgroup of low risk, the ultra low risk patients by MammaPrint, where we can safely reduce the duration of endocrine therapy. So this is another important first individualization of medicine in breast cancer. The patient, we are discussing in terms of giving prolonged endocrine therapy for 10 years, or a combination of aromatase inhibitor and tamoxifen. But this is one group in which we can safely avoid or at least decrease the duration of endocrine therapy. The ultra low risk by MammaPrint, we can reduce the duration of endocrine therapy safely. So these are the various trials in which the ultra low risk was defined, and ultra low risk in the various studies, it has shown around in the IKRC, it was shown that around 17%, and it has excellent prognosis with a relapse-free interval of 100% at 8 years. In the FOCUS trial, it was around 12% of the ultra low risk and 98% distant recurrence-free interval at 10 years. And in the MINTAC trial, around 15% fell in the ultra low risk with 99% breast cancer specific survival at 8 years. And it was seen that is the last column. It was seen that there was no significant benefit of adding tamoxifen or endocrine therapy in the ultra low risk. So this is one subgroup in which we can safely reduce the duration of endocrine therapy in our clinical practice. So that is the benefit of the comprehensive genomic profiling. We can know in which patient we need to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy, even in clinically low risk group, and in which patient we can even think of reducing the duration of endocrine therapy. You don't think about chemotherapy. Reduce the duration of endocrine therapy to 2 years in ultra low risk MammaPrint cases. Now coming to the prospective data coming to the clinical trials in HER2 positive early breast cancer hormone receptor breast cancer. We all know about the TAILORx trial, the MINTAC trial, and the RxPonder trial. In the TAILORx trial, it was shown that in the low risk group, we can avoid chemotherapy, only need to give endocrine therapy. The primary endpoint was IDFS at 9 years. And in the MINTAC trial, it was shown that at 8.7 years, the primary endpoint was distant metastasis-free survival. And the 5-year distant metastasis-free survival was 95.1%. That's quite a huge number in the low risk group when we have avoided chemotherapy. So by MINTAC trial, we very well came to know that in low risk group, we can avoid chemotherapy with very good distant metastasis-free survival. So what is the importance of chemo prediction of Oncotype DX in node negative patients? So we all know the risk stratification from 25 to 100, it comes to the high risk Oncotype DX. So with the NSA-BP20 trial and the TAILORx trial, what is the benefit of chemo in this subgroup, in the high risk group? We all know that in high risk group, we cannot avoid chemo, we have to give chemo. But when we analyze through the data, there are certain shortcomings in the Oncotype DX. One is the NSA-BP trial, when we are analyzing, the chemotherapy used were not the one that we are using today. And a very small number of patients were in the high risk group. we see only 117 patients received tamoxifen plus chemotherapy, and the tamoxifen alone arm was only 47%. But it's the only published study showing chemo prediction in node-negative patients. So this is the shortcoming of Oncotype DX. In clinically high risk, the number of patients was very less. Even if you see the TAILORx trial, if you see the high risk group, when we are giving chemotherapy, the freedom from recurrence of breast cancer at 5 years was 92.7%, as against 92.8% in patients who are receiving no chemotherapy. So in high risk, the benefit of chemotherapy, the chemo prediction, is still a big question mark, as the TAILORx was not designed to confirm the predictive ability of Oncotype DX. Then coming to the node positive patients, what is the benefit? The chemo prediction in high risk group. So if you see the Oncotype DX is not predictive. When we see it's not predictive of chemotherapy benefit after 5 years. So if the patient is living after more than 5 years, the benefit of predicting the benefit of chemotherapy is not there with Oncotype DX. When we see the RxPonder trial, in which the node positive 1 to 3 lymph node positive patients was used, the Oncotype DX is not predictive of chemotherapy benefit in the first 5 years. And also seen that the risk score is not a continuous variable. As the risk score increases, the benefit of chemotherapy doesn't increase, as we have seen in the MammaPrint. MammaPrint, as the risk score increases, the benefit of chemotherapy actually improves. This is the distant metastasis-free interval. So no genomic assay has a definite data for the prediction of chemotherapy benefit in patients who are genomic high risk and clinically low risk. So that is the shortcoming of Oncotype DX with the TAILORx data. Now coming to the genomic high risk patient, when we are comparing the MammaPrint and Oncotype DX, in the MINTAC trial, the MammaPrint high risk, there was around 2,398 patients, of which the clinically low risk was 592 and the clinically high risk was 1,806, which was randomized to chemotherapy versus no chemotherapy in 1:1 ratio. And if you see the distant metastasis-free interval, chemotherapy versus no chemotherapy, it was 98.1% versus 95.6%. Coming to the NSABP trial, the clinically low risk was very less. It was around 40%. The clinically high risk was 124%. Randomized to chemotherapy versus no chemotherapy, the chemotherapy number was 170. 28 patients were clinically low. No chemotherapy number was only 47%. So the total clinical low with genomic high was only 40%. So there is no genomic assay has provided prospective randomized data regarding chemotherapy benefit in clinical low risk. That is the small tumors, node negative, but the genomic profiling showing high risk other than MammaPrint. So these are shortcomings of Oncotype DX, which is the oldest one. We are more commonly using Oncotype DX, but there are certain shortcomings of Oncotype DX because the number of patients in the NSABP trial who fall in the clinical low group and genomic high was very less. So the data is not that robust. So if you see the original NSABP data, the total number of patients was 2,363, but the samples were unavailable for around 1,600 patients. For the samples available was only for around 651 patients. The tumor samples remaining after excluding the HER2 positive was only 569 patients, out of which the risk score less than 18 was 1.7. The risk score from 18 to 30 was 6.7, and risk score more than 31 was 41%. The patients receiving tamoxifen plus chemotherapy was 365. Tamoxifen alone was 204. So in the risk score, the high risk patients, more than 31 score in the NSABP, usually in the initial NSABP, the high risk was considered more than 31, more than or equal to 31, was only 97 patients. In 2006, when we brought it down to 25, it was around 164. the tamoxifen plus chemotherapy was only 68 and the tamoxifen alone arm was 28. So considering these numbers are not that huge. The data may not be that great. So the clinical risk in TAILORx and NSABP, if you see the clinically low risk and clinically high risk, it was in the TAILORx trial, it was 74% clinically low risk, and the clinically high risk was 26%. So TAILORx showed that a clinically low risk population doesn't benefit from chemotherapy, and the NSABP 20, which showed that the clinically low risk 25% and clinically high risk was 75%, that a clinically high risk group benefits from chemotherapy. So the TAILORx trial is basically for showing that the clinically low risk doesn't benefit from chemotherapy, and the NSABP trial basically shows that the clinically high risk benefits from chemotherapy. But the TAILORx did not prove that the clinically high risk patients, the risk score of more than 25, can safely forego chemotherapy. And the NSABP trial also didn't prove that the clinically low risk, because of the low number of patients, which are clinically low risk patients with a risk score of more than 25, can benefit from chemotherapy. So these are the main shortcomings of the TAILORx trial and the NSABP trial. Coming to the differential advantages of MammaPrint plus Blueprint. So we have already discussed that it's a comprehensive profiling, genomic profiling. Its results are independent of the clinical pathologic factors. We have already discussed that it is 70 gene assay MammaPrint, and it's not including the ER, PR, HER2, Ki67. Results is independent of the hormone therapy compliance. The MammaPrint is studied in clinically high-risk patients, and the MammaPrint is predictive of the benefit of chemotherapy in high-risk group. FDA cleared the category 1 evidence for lymph node positive, 1 to 3 lymph node positive. We can use the data according to the MINTAC trial, and the Blueprint can add as an additional tool for functional molecular subtyping. Especially when we are thinking of neoadjuvant treatment, we can use Blueprint for assessing which treatment protocol has to be used, and provides clinicians with complementary information for clinical decision making, clinically validated in untreated patient. Test supports clinically relevant question: can chemotherapy be reduced for clinically high risk? And MammaPrint predicts lack of benefit from chemotherapy in especially low risk patient. And evidence for the test is acknowledged by the regulatory body and clinical experts. And it offers the most comprehensive genomic profiling for breast cancer, including the molecular subtyping. So with Blueprint, we can actually divide into luminal A, luminal B, the HER2/neu, and the basal subtype. In the basal subtype, it can be ER positive basal subtype and the ER negative basal subtype. So these are the genomic testing options for early breast cancer, which is available. The MammaPrint and Blueprint, which offers the comprehensive coverage. The Oncotype DX, the most commonly used and the oldest one, the EndoPredict, the Prosigna, the breast cancer index. The MammaPrint, Oncotype DX, EndoPredict, and the Prosigna has all been approved by the FDA. The breast cancer, I don't think index has been approved. So this is the report summary when we are sending for the MammaPrint and Blueprint. So if you see the MammaPrint, the first one showing MammaPrint low risk, luminal B type, luminal A type, and the second one, the MammaPrint score of 0.35355. It's a high risk luminal type B, and they specifically show the benefit of chemotherapy. In the first one, the absolute benefit of chemotherapy is less than 1.5%, and in the second one, the absolute benefit of chemotherapy is more than 12%. So it's very easy to decide regarding the adjuvant treatment when we are using this comprehensive genomic profiling. So this is what we are putting forward. Every woman deserves a unique treatment strategy according to the molecular subtype, and if it's possible, we should think of doing comprehensive genomic profiling in patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We received some questions from our audience. I believe both questions were already answered by Dr. Abhishek already. If you have any more questions, I'm not sure if we've answered Dr. Mahesh's question. He said, hi, so what is the main USP and advantages of MammaPrint versus Oncotype DX? And he also asked he has a query for Oncotype DX. I've convinced clinician, but he has denied Mama Print test. He told me more info and relevant data we can get from DX. Is it? So, Dr. Atul, are you there? I believe you answered part of that question. Okay.
Basically, the important part is the MemmaPrint is providing, as discussed by Dr. Mithun and me, regarding the ultra low and the high risk patients vessel type. So this subgroup which cannot be defined on the Oncotype DX. So the treatment strategy can change with the ultra low risk patient as well as for the patients who are ER positive vessel type. Number two, the follow-up for the MemmaPrint, this MINDEC trial is now more than 8 years. Compared to the node positive clinically high risk patient, the Pondrex trial, they have a follow-up of almost 5 years. So they have a better follow-up available and they have a more high risk patient included in the study. So these are the 2-3 points which should be convincing to patients and the clinician that MemmaPrint combined with Blueprint have a better prognostic and therapeutic decision tool compared to the Oncotype DX.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to Mithun sir. Thank you to Abhishek sir also. If we don't have any more questions, I'll hand over the mic to Mr. Avinash Chandra for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Avinash.
Thank you, Kashish. On behalf of OnQuest, I would like to first thank all the speakers, Dr. Atul, Dr. Mithun, and Dr. Abhishek for his very extensive and elaborative coverage on the topic. And also, I would like to thank all the audience who were very patient in listening all the details, and there was various kind of queries which were exchanged. And at the end, I would just like to inform the audience that in India, we are the exclusive distributor of Agendia for MemmaPrint and Blueprint test. So we would like to have any queries. So please, you can go on to our social network page, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And also you can visit our website for more details. And in case of any queries, you can post there and we would love to answer your queries. So thank you. Also would like to thank Kavina team, Mr. Kashish, for organizing this webinar and helping us all the way. And thank you once again, everyone.